I've had so many questions about holotropic breathing and how it works, how the different functions, how it affects people. And no, I've never really been able to find a structured answer. It seems like there's a
Okay.
lot of guesswork and there's a lot of people
Okay.
who say different things, and I'm hoping that you'd be able to shed some light
Okay.
on it. I
Okay.
want to understand the spiritual side of things and also want to compare that and marry that with the scientific side of things and see
Okay.
where they overlap as much as possible. Not to
Mhm.
say that one's right and one's wrong, but more to say that if there's something to it, we just haven't got the words or the wisdom to be able to put them together yet.
I
I'm
see.
liking that
Okay.
exploration, and I'm hoping through your experience, you'd be able to shine a lot of light on that.
Sounds perfect. Yeah. I hope I can, shed some light and share my wisdom. That's I'm happy to share as much as I know about it. I know I have a few colleagues, not actually in Australia, but in Tasmania and New Zealand. One of them
Mm.
is a mentor in holotropic. She's one of the faculty members in Tasmania. And then I certified with one of my holotropic brothers. He is in New Zealand. And
So are
that's
you
about how
originally
many of them we have there. Am I originally from the US? No. Mm-mm.
New Zealand?
No.
Where are you from?
So I was born in northern Argentina, near Brazil.
Oh,
And
nice.
then when I was like around 10, my family moved to Spain. So I was raised in Spain and then moved to the US when I was like 20. So there's a lot of
Moving around.
migration and yeah.
So, because you detailed in your journey how you had that side of you when you were younger and you felt disconnected from, and it was through
hmm
these journeys that brought you back to that
Yeah.
way of thinking and feeling. That's a fair comment.
Yeah. So it just feels like the way that I think about it now is that I was open, right? I was always a seeker and I had a connection to the other side. It's almost like I was born with a memory of what it feels to be one with the all. And it was more like a sensation and a memory. And that what Jung calls the religious or the transcendental impulse that has nothing to do with religion itself, a structured religion, but more with that impulse for transcendence and that impulse that every human being has towards looking beyond to what we are in the body and just and ask about the meaning of life and who we are. So that was very open and expanded, but I didn't have any mentorship. Like that happens to a lot of us and any guidance. I just was born in a family that didn't have any tools around that. So, and it was also very dysfunctional. So it kind of got shut down and
Mm,
misdirected as I got into my teen years into, of course, the need to transcend and to connect to the other side was still present. And it got distorted into drugs and alcohol because that will kind of sort of get you there,
yeah.
minus all the wisdom, all the teachings. But it is the way that we have in our societies and all of the young people. That's the only way. So that was kind of my teens. And then I moved to the US and like my late 20s is what something like around Saturn return is when something started to click again. And I started
Mm.
to seek knowledge and seek wisdom, um, reading and exploring many different ways. And I don't know if you're familiar with this book, The Course of Miracles.
I'm
Um,
not too familiar now.
well, that was the book that got introduced to me. And there's a lot of, we can say Christian gnosis, but it can be like a lot of Buddhist teachings. Like that's kind of the theme and the flavor of it. So
Mm,
that kind of reconnected me to that sort of wisdom. And it started to frame a lot of things and direct me. And that kind of like took me into the exploration since I am in Colorado. I was here near Boulder. If you're familiar with Boulder, it's a very, new age kind of place where people are really exploring. I got connected to plant medicine. Like I heard about it. And once I started doing research, it felt really like a right way for me to explore like a path.
mm.
And my mainstream job was working as an interpreter and translator for the court system. And I think I just shared with this colleague of mine who's also Ecuadorian and part Lakota. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go to plant medicine. And she gave me one look. I don't know why I shared that with her, but it
By
was perfect.
plant medicine, you mean ayahuasca or
Yes.
yeah.
Ayahuasca, ayahuasca. And she gave me one good look and she's like, yeah, you're not ready for that. And I'm like, oh, why? It's like, yeah, let's talk. So she happened to be sort of a shaman. She grew up in Ecuador, trained with the Taitas. She was part of the Lakota tribe. She basically took me under her wing and trained me in shamanism. And then I sat with medicine with her quite a few times, and that kind of like, right, completely expanded open and sort of connected me back to. I could say that it took me back into the path, but at the very entrance. So now I'm like,
Mm.
so what do I do with this now? And it was amazing. It was very helpful, but it didn't feel like I could bring the things that I was being shown and integrate them in my life, in my day to day. So I stopped doing it and I went training, but it expanded me. So I went training into Jungian transpersonal coaching or psychology, um, evolutionary astrology, archetypal astrology, and that through astrology, I got connected to breathwork and I found holotropic breathwork. So I went for the training.
No, so it's interesting to see how you've married those together almost seamlessly throughout your journey. I feel like that's for me, that was something that 'cause I haven't done any plant medicine. One day I would like to, but when that happens, it happens. It's not something
Yeah.
I'm actively seeking. But it seems that those steps to that journey come to people at different times and stages. And like you say, it's seeming almost in some sense that your friend who was into their shamanism just flat out said, "You're not ready." I found that really interesting because I had, during some of my own experiences in the past, different psychedelic substances, it
Hmm.
was a very much almost felt like it was a gatekeeping situation
Hmm.
where it was, I know I'm not ready at this point. And then I
Hmm.
met afterwards, years down the line, after I was ready, I'd met other people who in my head I felt they aren't ready or they are ready or they have experienced it or they're looking to experience it. And it became more of a visceral feeling than it
Yeah,
was a, a judgment on things that are logical.
exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. And that should always be the guidance, right? That like the internal guidance. Because sometimes you get, at least that happens for me too. You get that inner guidance and sometimes you can't quite frame it with the logical brain. But I knew I had to leave. Like that was not my circle. It took me back to the gate of kind of like it will take me back. It is going to take me back full circle at some point, but I wasn't there yet. But I knew that what happened to me was extraordinary. But but what do I do with it? I can't even frame it. I didn't know how to bring the tools because what is it? It's not really that worth it to me if it's just a
Mm.
trip and then I can't quite actually bring it here. So I went training, and holotropic was a way in which it gave me all the tools to hold space, to be present with all of my processes. It was a ways in which you could kind of access similar realms, but at a slower pace in a very structured environment with a lot of academics, but also a lot of spirit. So both things were present. And what was really, and we can talk about more like about holotropic and what it is about in a minute. But
Please,
what
yes.
really struck me was the people and the caring that they had, just the tribe, the community being so, and the ethics. There was nothing woo woo about it. It was very ethical. It was very clean, and it was very helpful to people, and it was very caring. So through holotropic training, I met somebody that was a plant medicine woman from Mexico, and the medicine called me again.
Mm.
And I came full circle with it. And at that point, I was ready to fully integrate it. So it
Yes.
kind of came around. Hmm.
That's because that's the way similar to what I saw there. It was without that guidance, it's being completely on your own with those kind of experiences through
Hmm.
substance use or through physical breath work or whatever way you
Hmm.
manage to get to that part. It can be a very eye-opening experience to see what you are capable of and to be essentially scared beyond your wildest dreams at times when it's
Yeah.
people that can be there to hold your hands because I was around some bad people.
Yeah.
Well, not bad people, but some people who weren't helpful for my journey
Yes.
at that time in my life. And separating from them was one of the hardest but best things I'd had to do at the time. And then
Yeah.
I got it into my head afterwards, but my feeling was I would like to explore these things more. I'd like to explore plant medicine and or DMT and things like that in the future. However, beforehand, it was completely recreational for me.
I see. Yeah.
And then I thought, I'm not going to seek these things out because I had a sense that by seeking them out, it would be trying to force something to happen.
See.
Whereas if it comes about at some point, great. But
Fair.
it'll happen when that happens. How do you, and that's what, again, led me towards the holotropic breathing. I've heard multiple things from different people in different experiences, and it got me curious to looking at this as a practice and
Mm.
as a essentially fundamental training, as opposed to right, let's take this and see what happens kind of thing. How would you compare the experiences between what you had with plant medicine, maybe some other substances, and then now being well trained and experienced with holotropic breathing?
People ask me that a lot. Because I have choice, I do both quite often. Like I'm very involved in both paths. I would say they're very complementary. In my personal experience and that of others that kind of do both, they complement each other really, really well. The containers are very different. And so in the plant medicine, depend on what lineage that is, it's going to have, at least my lineage is kind of structured. Sorry, there's a lot of rigor. There's a way to be in the ceremonial space. There's firmness that we work to work with the medicine with firmness and discipline. So in the holotropic container, you are going to have structure, but there's more of a full expression. So as the participant or the breather, because you do take turns with the person that you partner up for the events or the workshops, and you're going to be a breather and a sitter. So you will get a chance to also hold space for somebody. And this is amazing because you get to sit with whatever happens to you while the other person is going through whatever they're going through, or nothing is happening to them, nothing is happening to you, and you get to be there with a container. So that's really helpful. And but for the breather, they have full expression, whether it's anger, joy, laughter, anything. There is movement if they want to stand up and move. So people usually have a bandana to keep their eyes closed. So it's more internal journey. But we do offer what we call the soft container. We're going to be around you. We're not going to touch you. We do not intervene. That's very different than other like modalities of breath work where people go and coach or like tell you to breathe. We do not intervene. We assume, and this is the same in my plant medicine lineage, that the inner healing wisdom is within you. And that's between you and that inner healing wisdom that I do not have power over that. And it's the same in our plant medicine. Your connection with the divine is yours. We're not intervening. We're not teaching you, coaching you. We're just facilitating, helping you, keeping you safe. So that's a little different than the plant medicine, where that full expression is a little, let's just say it's not that less allowed. There's less space for that. Or
Mm.
you'll be taken into the healing space to do that, but not in the ceremonial space.
Could that be
So
possibly because of the dangers of taking the plant medicine where haven't got as much control over the experience, potentially?
it,
So it
yeah, yeah. So it
could be a
doesn't get
spiraling
completely
mentality.
yes, exactly. Doesn't get completely discombobulated. Absolutely. Yeah. So there's more of a contained experience. Mhm.
Mm.
Uh, and in terms of the journey itself, I feel like I pretty much go to the same realms. Holotropic can be um, sometimes a lot more sensation based and somatic. There's a lot of body involved, very embodied. But I feel like I traverse the same areas. It's just that instead of being in the airplane going at high speed, I'm kind of going on the bicycle, picking up the flowers. So there's more like a different pace with it,
Mm.
and a
Do you
different
have more of a
presence. Mhm.
so you have more of a chance to sort of take stock, look around, and
Sometimes, yeah.
ex- sometimes, yeah, yeah, and sort of become aware of what's happening more
Yep.
so you can become more comfortable where you are.
Yes. I would say that yes, especially if you compare that one with a non-experienced plant medicine.
Mm.
Yes. Mhm.
So when you talk about the realms in particular, would you say that is a layered effect, as in you can definitively say or feel that you are sort of moving from one state of experience to another one, to another one.
Mhm.
Are these different, or are they to different degrees? How would you best explain that journey as you venture deeper?
We're staying with the holotropic. So,
Yeah,
right.
holotropic. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it can be all or just one, or all at the same time overlapping. So what we usually do in the orientation, we explain to people uh, the experiences that they can have, right? So this is what I'm going to do here too. It can be somatic, purely somatic. I mean, you're feeling things in your body, you're twitching, you're moving, sensations without story. Because sometimes the content that you're tapping into, it's very much imprinted in the psyche. Even before you had framing, you had language, you had the capacity to formulate thoughts, because it goes way into the birthing and the conception and all of your time in the womb, birth when you were a child and beyond. It can be that. It can be archetypal, meaning you're visiting realms of archetypal knowledge. What I mean by that is like, let's just say that you do not have a concept or an understanding of certain entities, of the Amazonian entities. And you come back from the experience and this has happened and you start describing what you encountered. And I recognize that. Oh, that's Jurema from the tradition. But you never knew about this. That you tapped into an archetypal, like a source of knowledge that is universal to all of humanity, that you personally didn't have an experience. And this happens to people that don't have a concept of like the Vedic deities, and they have a whole encounter with Kali or with Shiva, and they come back and explain that, but they've never been connected to that. So that's an archetypal. It's that blueprint of knowledge that we all share by virtue of being in the human family. That is beyond epochs and ages and personal biography and culture. That's something you
So,
can tap into. Mhm.
so see, that's what interests me quite a lot at the moment, in particular, especially speaking with different psychologists, scientists, sort of neurobiologists, and then also spiritual teachers, practitioners as well. Is that a lot of these things seem like people are talking about the same thing, just in different ways. And I'm a firm believer that as humans, we do have a knowledge of things that happen, and we
Yeah.
can explain those in certain ways, but we describe them in a human way, as in from our story-based brains, as opposed to a scientific, biological, chemical-based way. So, and there's a big disconnect between people who speak those languages and who don't, I'd imagine. So, in the same way, the way you're saying to me now that somebody will explain a certain type of experience or entity that they
Good.
spoke with or they engaged with, you understand that to be this form and this through scripture and through archetypes. That's in I see that as akin to me explaining to say a therapist or a psychologist that this is happening, and they're saying, yes, this makes sense through what you have said and how it links together and the personality types you have. And then the same way that me saying to a biologist that I've had this experience, and then them returning to me and saying, yes, this makes sense because of the different levels of dopamine and serotonin and how they interact with each other.
Mhm.
And it's finding a way that I believe we could blend those into a broader audience, because I feel there's a lot of skepticism around a lot of different areas of practice,
Yeah.
which is unnecessary to some degree because it's just almost like we're just speaking a different language,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
can be translated. Because
Yeah.
exactly like you were saying there with experience, with somebody who was talking about their experience whilst going through these levels and journeys. I had a similar visceral experience when talking to other people about my experiences on psychoactive substances, and them explaining to me that this is something they had that was very similar. Or I was trying to explain something to somebody, and then I explained it because I knew he had taken LSD previously. I
Mhm.
explained it in a way that he would understand through LSD, and in his head it clicked like, yes, that makes so much sense. And I don't quite know how how and why? So to your
Hmm.
best, and this is a big loaded question, but to your
Yeah.
best knowledge, how do you see that translation occur between people? How are we best to speak about these kind of, call it entities, chemicals, traits,
Hmm.
whatever you want to call them? How are
See,
we best to translate that for everybody?
into the scientific language, is that the question?
Just in a way that almost anybody could understand without
Mhm.
going too far, either
Yeah.
say to skeptical beliefs versus scientific dogma.
Hmm.
How can we
Yeah,
explain this to everyone?
that's a good question. Well, what I can say is you just mentioned DMT, right? The substance. This is the only psychoactive or entheogen that we segregate ourselves, that we actually produce in the brain, in the pineal gland. So one of the explanations of why breathwork actually gets you to those realms, and they're trying to prove this, I think it's Stanford. It's that when we breathe and do that type of breathing that is continuous and we create the right environment, we begin to move through the spinal fluid and activate the pineal gland to release our own DMT in small doses. So that would be your own inner production of DMT. So it's taking you into these places. Now, why does DMT do that to us or for us? We're still trying to figure that out. Only mammals produce DMT, but it seems that DMT is something that we release, especially in moments of shock, death, and birth. So it seems to be a transitional molecule that helps us. And I also actually was reading about it that it repairs the brain in case after shock or trauma we come back, like near death experience. It repairs the brain, so we have a better chance to be here alive. So, and why does it take us to these places? They're still trying to figure it out, but it does. And so that's with
Mm,
the breath work. And it seems that we are able to tap into, if you can think of a computer, this will be the easiest way to explain it to people, is that we're each the computer, the device, and there is the world net web all around with all the information. If I do not tap into it, it's there, but I'm not accessing it. And somehow it seems like with DMT now we have like a bigger access to the web, to the quantum field of knowledge. So it would just be the same as having a higher internet connection. You
mm,
just have a higher internet connection. You have the ability to really access information faster and in ways that with your lower speed you couldn't. The device is the same, the knowledge is there, but it's our capacity to access it that changes.
mm. That makes a lot of sense. And then, because this is where I'm torn, is because I was speaking with a neurobiologist the other day, called Dr. Kenneth Bloom, and he was
Mhm.
the man who founded the genes which are responsible for your dopamine receptors and how many you have. And he was talking to me about how there's an interesting thing that happens when we go through a state of shock or near death experience or trauma, which, coupled with the release of dimethyltryptamine, and our brains also dump a lot of serotonin in the moments after this has happened.
Yeah.
And what that can do, because that forces us, that's the main chemical that is released when we learn. That buzz, that feeling of knowing something and understanding something truly comes from a concentrated level of serotonin released in the brain, which evolutionarily makes a lot of sense because
Yeah.
that is what happens when something's happened that's almost killed us. We weren't expecting this to happen. We did not plan for this to happen. We need to now learn exactly why this is very quick. Otherwise, so it doesn't happen again, so we don't die. So this, I feel, there's a going hand in hand with why that guidance is important, is because if left to your own devices in those moments after trauma or after those releases of serotonin and dimethyltryptamine in the body and brain, we can make connections which may or may not be there, but they feel so viscerally real that we know them and understand them at our core that we almost it bypasses our more higher functioning or later developed portions of the brain to ingrain that into our memory, which is why I feel everybody who, well, most people who do have these experiences with either DMT or ayahuasca or even any or psilocybin,
Mhm.
it's one of the most profound things in their life, and it's changed them to their core because it just jumps straight past a lot of the nonsense that we tell ourselves in our day to day life. And I'm trying to piece together because obviously as a function of the human body and brain, that makes a lot of sense in different situations. And often when you speak to people, and it's evolutionary, it helps us all because we get a
Mhm.
lot of wisdom from those experiences. And at the same time, you also see some people who spiral in the wrong direction after these experiences. And often gets worse and worse because they haven't had that guidance or that helping hand. And I'm unsure as to whether these experiences are universal in terms of different deities or beings we'll meet or interact with, or especially when it comes to ayahuasca and holotropic breath work, that we are very susceptible to stories that we are told and the story that we have bought into prior to and following our own
Mm.
experiments.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. To me, I've seen both, and I'm sure there's truth to both. That yeah, there's a lot of conditioning and learning through hearing a lot of the storytelling. Second, I do I do know and have experienced and seen people tapping into the universal field. And in the end, as a facilitator that's there to help people, release their trauma, go through, work through something that they're really struggling with, that's really keeping them, hindering them from evolving, from being in the world in a different way. To me, it doesn't matter because the symbolic meaning is what mattered to them.
Mm,
And that's like, we are mythopoetic beings. We've been telling stories since the beginning of time. Even before we could talk, we were playing instruments, we were drawing. It's part of how it's part of the mythopoetic of the world. So I've
mm,
had that question asked before, and even people go, but is it real? Did this really happen? And I look at them and like, does it really matter? It happened at some level and it's
yeah.
helped you. And it's helping you, it's giving you a story, it's giving you a tool that you didn't have. It's not my job to go prove it. That doesn't matter to me. But
Mm.
that's where I'm at because I'm not a scientist, and yeah, and I do
I think,
hold some of those aspects close because I want to have the language. But to me, what's important is what resolved in the human that had the experience. What was the catharsis? The catharsis they had that happened.
yeah.
It was real to them,
Yes,
and it wa-
I
yeah,
completely agree with that, I'd say. With regardless of whether it's a tangible thing you can count with numbers or write down,
yeah,
if you had that experience, then it is real.
yeah,
I go as far as saying a similar thing with religion. I'm not personally a traditional religious believer. However, the fact that people believe at their core
mhm,
in large numbers these things, they those stories and those scriptures, those words have very physical effects on the world
yes,
around you. So even if it is not quote unquote real, it is real in the sense that it has an effect on everything that is here. And if
mhm,
somebody has an experience, as ridiculous as it may seem to a scientific eye, if they had that experience, to them it is real. I
yeah,
feel
and
I feel people do often get that mixed up between the words mixed up, really, the phrasing of real and,
I
say,
think the
mathematical.
problem has to do with what real really is, right? It's like I would
Mm,
just being Cartesian here, meaning like it's real, just what I can touch and perceive with my five senses, right?
mm,
And we have more senses than those, so we're just not trained to be in tune to them. Those are not the only senses that we have. And we just, in our Western world, we're just used to like, this is reality, I can touch. But how many times are you driven or make decisions based on things you cannot see? that you can feel. Like, can you
Mm,
prove love to me? It's a feeling. You can't touch it. Beauty, those platonic concepts, they exist in a different realm, and we all know about them, and we all participate in them. Um,
mm,
Nobody would dispute the presence of beauty, the presence of grace, the presence of truth. Um,
mm.
but show truth to me in itself.
Yeah. It does seem at times there is, by a lot of people who haven't had any of these more of these different experiences, we'll say, for lack of a better term, that there's a, a very they're very fast to throw them out the window and say, "Oh, it
Yeah.
doesn't real. This person's this person's that." And it's a
Mhm.
shame because it's almost without failure. Those people who do have those experiences at some point become very humble and very willing and and
Mm.
very kind to others. Is like, oh, okay, now I kind of get it.
Yeah.
Kind of being the key word there. Now I see there's an opening there. 'Cause the best way I could describe from one of my experiences was I built up a wall of what my reality was all around me for
Mhm.
my entire life. And when having one of these experiences, there was like a crack in the wall where a little bit of light was shining through. And I was curious enough at the time to reach for it and look at what it was and look through. And then that whole wall just crumbled. And it was a case of, I have no idea anymore. So how can I be
Yeah.
certain of anything if I have no idea? If my entire life to this point has been a lie that I've told to myself over and over and over.
Right. And that is just it's just seeing one little aspect of the truth as opposed to seeing the whole different facets of it, or like one aspect of reality. There are many aspects of reality. When you're dreaming and you don't know what you're dreaming, it's very real to you. It's extremely
Mm,
real. And that we all have that experience. This is not just for people that are doing spiritual work. We all dream. Um, so there are many different of experience reality. This is not the only one, just as five senses. Um,
yeah. And I like what you mentioned earlier, how it's not it's not useful if it's
mhm.
just like a trip or a different experience.
Up
It's
to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's useful if it has some kind of net positive on yourself and the rest of the world and people around you.
And I wouldn't even go as far as positive just yet, because sometimes the process looks worse before it looks better. But I would say meaning. If it makes meaning, if it's meaning making, is it going to bring meaning to your life?
Mm,
Is it going to shed light into something, even if it is not positive, because it's not a comfortable content that you may encounter? But is it bringing? So holotropic means movement or path towards wholeness, and this is never meant to mean movement towards perfection or eternal positivity. This is very new age. It means wholeness. It means we bring all the pieces of who we are, of everything, into a wholeness. We take them all, even the ones that we're not very happy with or that we deem less positive. And it's in the wholeness that now we're operating from a different place. There's a resilience that takes place, that occurs. There's a core that happens, that
mm,
builds up within you, that gets stronger and stronger. And now you have that ability to face things and content, internal and external, in a different way. But, and yes, eventually it'll translate, for some people it's faster than others, into more positive um, outlooks in life. That doesn't mean that life changes, because life continues to be challenging, right? For all of us. But it's your orientation towards the challenge that changes. It's your reaction to it. It's your relationship to what happens to you that changes, and to what actually happened to you. That's the biggest thing in the beginning, is changing your relationship to what actually happened to you, which could have been really traumatic. It could have been really, sometimes it's out of omission. Your parents didn't give you anything or didn't give you care. You were kind of neglected. So it's relating to that in a different way. So you are sort of healed from that, but you're not erasing it. It happened, right?
mm.
And then relating to what's coming at you in a different way. That's what changes.
So Do you feel that there is a benefit to doing these practices continuously, or does that
I do.
effect wear off over time? Was it the first time was very much in a very eye-opening experience, and is it a similar effect now each time, or is it you're more just reminding yourself of?
So that's a good one. I like how you finished that because I was going to go to that. Um, so not really in terms of my first experience was, or like first experiences can be huge. They can all be different. I feel that it can work on both holotropic and plant medicine. Sometimes people go in and either their defenses are too strong. Um, they don't go very deep. So the trajectory looks different for everybody. Now, the benefit of doing it continuously is that it, it's not a red pill. You do it once and you're healed forever. You're this ascended master that
Mm,
just, so it takes time. You got to work through your content. And the speed at what we work with depends on each one of us and the level of trauma, the content that we're working with. Depends on so many variables. But what I do think the practices help is in forgetting less and less,
mm.
forgetting that connection, that wholeness. Like it's almost like we dip our feet somewhere else. This kind of like source of renewal. Even if the content was really hard and it looked like you had a very non-positive journey. If the
So
journey resolves well, you come back with a lot of positive. It's almost counter,
yeah.
like, whoa, that was really hard, but I feel better. Right. So over time, yes, the better
Would
begins to stay longer and be bigger, be higher.
would you say there's a potential truth to the opposite being the case as well, where the better of an experience you have, the worse things could be following?
It has happened.
Mm,
Not too often though. Yeah, not too often, but more in plant medicine. I'm thinking not so much in holotropic. Yeah, but not too often. I feel like the only times when that happens is when we judge it because we
mm,
get used to the intensity, and we also humans were very good at grabbing at things and like attaching. So now it's like I've been doing it for a while. Oh, I didn't have a very intense journey. That means nothing happened. It's more
mm,
around that judgment that then you're like, that
yeah.
was not even worth it. But because then that is just us not having the ability to also see the beauty and the wisdom and how much we can get just from gentle and soft journeys.
That was something that I found quite prevalent in meditation as well. That judgment
Mm.
on the meditation that you have just done being counter to where it's you're wanting something to happen, and that question being, well, what did you expect to happen? And it's more of a paying attention to without judging, as opposed to a complete feel that like this is supposed to do something. It's training me in a certain way or another.
Mhm.
Because I mentioned this um, because I remember very vividly. I heard something a while since then, which said, "Once you have touched," this is to quote. It was along the lines of, "Once you have touched enlightenment, you will spend your life trying to get it back."
Yes.
Not to say that enlightenment is or isn't anything or whatever. Just to
Yeah.
put that aside for one moment. But I remember that, and it stuck with me because I remember vividly once this was post a psychedelic experience a couple of weeks later, and I was having a tough time sort of reorganizing myself afterwards.
Mhm.
It was a very particular moment. I remember exactly where I just felt I dropped absolutely everything, and I felt like I was floating. My whole body was I was walking around completely light, not a thought in my head whatsoever, which wasn't in its right place. And it started to just it's an incredible blissful feeling at the time. But go around my normal day, I just didn't feel any malice towards anyone or anything, and everything was in its right place. And I was floating about 2 inches off the floor as I was walking around, and everything just seemed easier. And I remember the more I thought about that experience as it was happening, the more that feeling disappeared.
Mm.
And the more I let it carry on, the more it came back. And I felt a very similar sense when I was speaking with people. that if I was thinking too much about what I was going to say, or I was trying to do something in the turn, that it would go worse, well, seemingly go worse. And when I just let it go as it went, it seemingly went a lot better.
Yeah, so you're kind of describing being in the flow. When you're
Yeah,
flowing with it, it's the same when you play music. If you play an instrument, the moment your
yeah.
head comes in, you need your head in the beginning to understand the music language and the rhythms. But then if your head comes in, you're gonna mess it up. You just
Well,
have to be in the flow. And
it was
yeah,
a
the moment
very
you start grabbing, it goes.
that gave me a very visceral feeling of what it was like when I was having my own psychedelic experiences, and when I was something I took with me afterwards, because occasionally I can't do it intentionally, but I can just drop into these
Mm,
that state of flow when doing certain acts. For me, speaking to people is one of those
yeah.
acts. Hence the podcast arrived from that, and so on and so forth.
Oh, wow.
But then within sports and all sorts. But it seems to be that there's something there which, when people have sort of tickled, so to speak, they just can't get enough of it. And that can lead to a lot of, I feel,
Yes.
overcomplicating within a lot of
Yeah.
dogmatic or
Yeah.
religious things that surround that one feeling.
Yes. We can grab onto anything. Anything can become an addiction. Anything can be misused. Absolutely anything. So that these are tools. This is why we never glorify them and put them as the thing. They're tools, and they're gonna serve us depending on how we engage with them, how we approach it. The moment we go into like the grabbing and addictive aspect, it's not gonna respond in the same way. The wisdom is gonna be withdrawn. That's my experience, usually. With holotropic, it's a little different because it's not like you can engage in holotropic breath work by yourself. Just being by yourself is holotropic is already not happening because you need the container, you need the community, you need the sitter with you, you need the long experience, you need the arts integration afterwards. So it's a whole thing. But I have a lot of people even in my life, in my community, that just go to breath work. They do a lot of breath work throughout the day. And it's almost like a ways to just another thing to do. It's just yet another thing they gotta grab onto, right?
Mm,
So, and that's for with everything. We can do this with everything, with plant medicine, with everything. So, this is what we have to check: how we're approaching things. What's the intention? Intention is everything behind our approach. I'm like grabbing it. This is where the
mm,
Buddhist practice comes into place. Like
mm. Well, that
where
was
am I coming?
dukkha.
Where am I coming from? Yeah.
Yeah, that was, from my understanding, dukkha, which I read a lot of the sort of Buddhist practices and more
Mhm.
Eastern philosophy and then Western philosophies since, and some of them just seem to make a lot more sense. Whereas beforehand, when I dabbled with them years prior, I was like,
Okay.
what is this nonsense? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then I picked
Mm.
up the same books afterwards and I was like, okay,
Oh.
okay, right. And I was
Yeah, yeah.
swallowed as much of that as I could. But is that something that you would, as a practitioner, is that something that you would monitor or let people know or guide?
Mm,
Or would you let them unravel that on their own?
I would definitely guide it. Depends on which container I'm in. Like I said, with holotropic, it's just not gonna happen because there's not gonna be enough chances for them to get addicted to that. They have to come, it's involved, they gotta come to a workshop, it's a whole weekend or a week. I mean, how often are you gonna be able to do this? It's not like an everyday thing that you're gonna be able to go grab
Mm,
for. But with other things, I definitely do. And I bring that conversation. I bring it up, and I guide them towards intention, literally questioning the intentions and approaching these things with reverence. This is really the way to everything.
mm,
If it just, and we Westerners have more of a tend to fall for that. Like, let's grab it. Let's just make it a thing. Let's just make
mm,
it a thing, another thing to do. The Eastern people do not so much because they have that Eastern wisdom tradition, different way of approaching things. And the indigenous peoples do not either. So
mm.
always go to that,
I did.
and check in your ego. Mhm.
Yes. Well, that was the debate with it. Where is it essentially become another distraction, or is it something that just by
Yeah.
paying attention to it softens your approach and works itself out. 'Cause I remember hearing or reading that the best way to reach enlightenment is to fall into it. It just happens over or happens or doesn't happen and can last for as long as it does at that time. And that was a very Eastern way of looking at it, as in from the West, it's almost like we attach our ego then to the idea of an enlightened
Yeah.
state. And it's like we need to get this, or it's having a purpose for everything that we do. And I feel that I'd like to know where you would draw the line between purpose and intention.
Hmm. I never thought about it that way. Um, because when I think of purpose, I think of something else. I think of like purpose, my soul purpose, my dharma. I think of dharma when I think of purpose. But I know that you're asking it in a different way. You're meaning like, what's the use for this thing, right? What use are we going to give it? Practical use.
Well, so to clarify a little bit, I'd say what I mean by when I say and understand from other people saying purpose is that there is an intention behind what I'm doing, which is beyond myself. The intention isn't directed towards myself. I have
Mm.
directed this intention towards something which I have no idea why. In essence, this is what I feel that my purpose is, and I have some sort of kick from doing that. But
Yeah,
then,
it's more like a dharmic situation, like a dharma. You
yes,
find joy, pure joy, and this is what you're born for
but
in the
then,
world.
yes, yes, exactly. And then intention, seemingly that we have the choice of intention. But if all roads lead to home, for our intentions going one way or another, it seems that we're asked to ignore our intentions at times or to understand our intentions. And I can't see a way really how anything that's your intention isn't in some way self-centered
Mm. Well,
from every person.
everything is going to be, this is coming from here, right? It's
Mm,
going to come from the self. We are in a self situation. We are in an ego situation. We're not getting rid of it. That's a myth, unless you're like the Buddha. Like, and we need the ego to function in the world. So it's going to come from here. The thing is, like, is it coming from here to just serve this? Or how is it
mm,
like the intention is it, what's the direction of that? Is it coming for service and for goodness? And the way that I'm approaching something, because this is how the conversation got into being. What is the approach serving? What is the intention serving? What is it producing? So if it's
mm,
addictive, it's responding to something, to a need, to a hunger. So it's going to serve something back in here, and it's not really feeding it because it's a wrong approach. So it's kind of layered like that. So intention, it's important to check your intentions. What's my intention when I do this, when I approach this? What do I want to gain from it? But
mm.
but also what is it feeding? What is it
They,
serving?
okay. Then do you find that people's intentions often drastically change after partaking in plant medicine or holotropic breathing?
I'm not going to say drastically change. Sometimes that happens gradually. Sometimes that happens drastically. Sometimes part of the intentions will happen drastically. Some will need to be worked through for longer. At least I can see that in my personal experience and what I've seen in others. It's not like a red pill. You drastically change. I feel like the first time you do it, something drastically happens to you, just because there's been so especially if you come from a very Western Cartesian kind of mindset, something profound
Mm.
happened. It's like, whoa, you just touched upon something. But that doesn't mean the work ends there. It just started. It's just that when you gain the black belt, your work begins now. You were
But
just preparing for it before.
what would you say that work is?
It's your whole life. It's working. It's purification, is what I would say. But I don't wanna get religious around it because I know that word can be very misused. And a lot of things can be attached to a purification, like in a puritanical way, or like perfection. It doesn't mean perfection. I mean the polishing, if you can think of yourself as a stone, is the polishing of that stone. So it can become precious and reflect the light. And that's gonna be different for you, and it's gonna be different for me. Because you're gonna have to polish different facets, different things in our personality, in our karmic lineage, in everything, in our mindsets, in our belief systems. Um,
Mm.
so it's just going to be working, polishing, working through that. And it's going to take, I don't know. I don't know that it ends actually. I'm not sure that people want to hear this, but I don't know that it ends. It just becomes a way of living.
Mm. That was the sense that I got from listening to and reading from different spiritual teachers and
Mm.
practitioners, is that in the end, it always seemed like it got to a case of it doesn't end. There is no end point, but there's a lot of seemingly a lot of steps to find that end point. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot more recently is that, especially how it ties into Western culture, is that Western culture there is very often seen as a point that you need to get to where you are as successful or financially or with family or socially or status based and in any other culture. But they almost
But we
seem to
also we
run.
also never get there.
Yeah, yes. And that's
So we keep
where
seeking.
we keep seeking. And I've been thinking about a lot how the people who often achieve these things that are Western markers of success often describe and feel and self-explain or say about themselves that they feel more damaged and further away from the things that are most important to us. And that got me thinking along similar lines with almost any external goal of it's almost the more that we desire it, the more that we are driven towards something and at what speed and intensity, the more we essentially feel that we lack
I would say the
something.
difference with this path is the opposite. Is that there's always going to be more to discover because the universe is infinite.
Mm,
The more you seek, the more you find. And that makes it not boring. The universe is expanding. There's always more. But the difference is that with this one, you do not feel like you lack. You always feel, at least uh, from what I can experience, more enriched, more fulfilled. There's like bigger resources, just richer, and there's no lack. You just know that there's no end to it, and you learn to accept it. So you get kind of excited for what comes next. That you feel really rich and nourished by all the stuff that you've um,
mm. Would you say
and
that
learned.
from your experience, is that something which is you've only found through different mentalism work, say whether it be psychedelics or holotropic breathing or
Mhm.
along those? Is that something you've only found to be so enriching and infinite through those paths, or have you found that at times from other areas or other experiences or other activities?
Yeah, definitely over other activities like being in nature, poetry, playing music. Yeah, but it's
Mm,
always those activities. It's probably not going to be working a 9 to 5 job or seeing that my bank account got this much money. It's those other activities that are going to. Well, of course, all the other things are going to have the quick dopamine release, right? Like, oh, that feels good in the moment, but it's not going to have
mm,
that sustaining. It's not food for us in the end. It's not the food that feed us. It's the food that feed our bellies. It feeds the
mm.
survival aspect of us, but it's not the food that feeds the soul.
And did you find something or anything change in your life outside or with yourself or
Ev-
with other people you have worked with as well?
Everything changed.
Outside of the practice. I mean, physically, in terms of, because I feel that there is a Western kind of belief deep down that if I do everything right, then good things will happen to me and very calming. Whether that be financially, socially, relationship wise. And You see a lot of people with their big, long morning routines and
Mhm.
doing different things. And it's a kind of a sense that if I do all these things in the right order, in the right way, then everything's just going to be looking up and smiling at me.
That's a very wrong approach, and it's distorted, and it
Yes,
feels like
well,
it
it's
comes
it's a
from a
very Western
religious.
approach.
Yeah, and it has like a Judeo-Christian aspect to it, where if I behave this well, then the kingdom of heaven is gonna be given to me, right? Whereas you don't find anything like that in any of the indigenous traditions and their wisdom and cosmology and knowledge and framing, and with the Eastern people either. Um, so it has that connotation. No, um, it can get rocky when you start changing. Everything changed for me, everything, and it was not fun for a while. It was really uncomfortable. It was really painful. But what I think happens is the following: the moment that you start changing internally and your frequency changes, your external world has to change. It's not a match anymore. Things change. You change, things change. This is just what happens. So it's going to look different for people. Sometimes relationships fall away, jobs that you felt fulfilled you stop fulfilling you just because you're changing. Um, Sometimes things you could tolerate in people, you have less of a tolerance, more boundaries around that. Toxic people, for instance, you have less of a tolerance with them. Not that you're mean or anything, but you have more like, no, you know, it can become lonely sometimes when you're very much in that path because, yeah, the people that you're going to be around are not going to be the majority of people. There are things that the mainstream society does that you're probably not going to be so drawn to anymore. So things do change. Um, and they're not always comfortable or pleasant, but it's worth it somehow.
Mm.
That's what I find because you are more aligned with yourself. You're more resourced. You're more whole. And when the wholeness is here, as opposed to seeking it out there, you are going to attract it out there. But there's going to be a lot of shedding of a lot of
Uh,
things.
I mean, a lot of maneuvering and things moving around at the same time. Because it does seem that it's such a, say, a pivot or a reality shake-up at times for a lot of people. Like, you hear stories of people who have dropped everything and gone and become a Buddhist monk, or they've left their families or partners, or even some mystical stories of people who've had these experiences and then they've won the lottery or blah 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 blah, met the love of their life the next day. And it seems almost seems that the more intense that those experiences are, that there is a guiding hand in the universe at times that puts you towards those things, and that's something that at the time felt after my own experiences felt quite prevalent, but then afterwards, a few months later, seemed to drop away, and that's when things became more clear to myself, as if almost for me, for my journey experience. Whereas I can from because I was very careful because I'd had people who've had different types of things happen to them and they've taken it in different ways. So at the time, I was very careful to make sure I was putting the pieces back together in
Mhm.
a way which I wouldn't be overconfident and wouldn't overcommit to something
Good.
which could potentially harm me, which I wasn't aware of. Because I've seen so many people who've had those experiences and then they've taken it the wrong way. So
And
would you
what was your
say that
experience with? Is it psilocybin?
yes, yeah,
Yes. Okay. Mm.
that was with psilocybin. So it wasn't obviously the experience. Well, to me, it didn't feel like the experiences that other people have described through dimethyltryptamine or ayahuasca.
It's
Um,
close though. It's close enough. They're in the same
well,
family.
I'll say
Hmm.
my experience, and I'd love to
Yeah.
get your take on what you may believe was happening and from what you've seen from different scripture, and try and piece it together. Because I've spoken to a few people who had similar experiences, but what happened with myself was when I'd taken them previously. I'd taken these drugs recreationally previously. I was living with friends at the time. The first couple times was just completely, as you'd expect, recreational, just la 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 la, not really paying too much attention to what I was feeling or the awareness around me and whatnot. But then a couple times later, I'd had some, and whether it was a little bit more than I was expecting or not, and who knows. But I felt a very real feeling within my senses in my body that when I was in a good mood, everything got more colourful, everything got nicer, and then everything that happened to me was better. And then when my mood, that pendulum swung to a negative, everything got very dark, scary, worse things were happening to me. And this wasn't just like things that were out of my control were getting worse because of the mood that I was in. And that would swing seemingly uncontrollably
Right.
back and forth. And that would be colors, shapes. I didn't have any vivid hallucinations of anything imaginary. Or it was just the things that were there had different like lines or patterns towards them. And they would be either aggressive, dark, scary patterns or vivid, bright, soft, loving patterns and feelings. And even to the extent of people around me and the environment around me became a lot more of a habitable versus uninhabitable world. And I was, at the moment, I could not piece together what was going on and was so scared that I had no control over what was going on around me. And it felt like it was, in a sense, all just being controlled and puppeted. And that's the experience I had at the time, which took a lot of piecing together my reality afterwards. And it did feel that my friends who were around me were different entities. It looks like it wasn't them. It felt like I had two friends who were different entities, almost like the devil and the angel on the shoulder kind of thing.
Mm.
Similar to.
Okay. S- Yeah. Yeah. Mushrooms can be quite wavy like that. Up and down, up and down.
Mm.
Yeah, they have that quality. Hmm. Yeah. So it makes a difference whether you do them ceremoniously in a place that is well held, um, with the right type of container. And I know that maybe that sounds like you don't know what I mean when I say that, right? But it's creating the energetic containers, um, and having people that know how to manage that. So then you're going to have the experience you're going to have, of course. But it's just the experience is different when you are in that space that is held as opposed to, because I've been there with both and I just don't ever do them recreationally for that reason.
I haven't touched them since.
Yeah.
I've always been curious about the experience and what I can learn from it. But
Mhm.
it's something which to me seemed very, in effect, dangerous from that, which is
It can
what's
be.
been.
People don't realize. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I had heard stories previously of people thinking that they could fly and therefore jumping out of the window of a top floor. And I thought,
Yeah.
from the first few times I ever took them on a small scale, I thought, how is that ever possible to
Hmm.
be that caught into what you were thinking was happening? And then I found myself chucking all the knives that are in the kitchen cupboard outside in fear that if they were there, something bad could happen to me. So it was all over the place at that time, which well, further down the line throughout that, I ended up getting hit by a car on that trip. So it was,
Whoa.
so that was the piecing together afterwards was a big part of my journey.
Right. So that is a journey that what we call a bad trip journey
Yeah.
that was not held properly. That was
Yeah.
actually not held at all,
No,
and
it wasn't. No.
did not resolve well. So that usually has more damaging effects
But
than a journey that can look extremely challenging, meaning you're struggling through it. And the journey is well held, it's going to resolve well. Then it's not going to be damaging.
well,
It's going
it
to be like,
was
whoa, I went through hell, and it's still better somehow. Like,
in a
there's
bizarre
a
way.
difference.
I would say that it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
And people say that.
Um, in the months, the
Yeah.
next couple, 2, 3 months were difficult and took a lot of time to take my time. But following on from that, I cannot see a way in which that not happening has not made my life better. At least to live, not
Yeah.
necessarily the physical surroundings of my life and financially or anything else, but my relationships got better, the place I find myself got better, my mood is better, my health is better, and it was something that I would never wish on anybody, but at the same time think it'd probably be good, but I don't know. This is why what's led me towards that kind of holotropic breathing as a mechanism for people to step into a state of mind which encourages a lot of self-reflection.
Yeah. And it's a more controlled environment. So people have an opportunity to go into that experience with company, with the facilitators, with the sitters, with the whole ritual around it. So, yes, because you have no idea how many people I've heard say the same thing you just said. It was a really bad trip, and it was the best thing that happened to me. And sometimes that doesn't end up that well, right? We have the people
Mm,
that jumped off the cliff or jumped off the window thinking they could fly. So at least in my practice, I want to avoid that. I want you can have the worst trip, but at least you're going to be held in the moment. So no, you're not jumping off a window.
mm. But is
So I want to minimize that. That's kind of what
oh,
we
of
do,
course.
facilitating and all that stuff. Yeah.
Of course, yes. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that style to anybody, and that's why I was more intrigued of holotropic breathing than anything, but the one thing that's turned me away from it, and I feel scares a lot of people from these experiences, especially in a more formal way, such as holotropic
Mhm.
breathing, where you've got that guidance, is the spiritual tie to what's happening in the experience and the tendency to explain things in a way which people have no concept of and are, in a sense, scared of. I was scared at times that I was going insane. And could be a very much an ingrained belief from when I was younger. When you hear of stereotypes in different communities have different stereotypes of people who talk like this or talk about these things are insane. And I was scared for a big portion afterwards that I was going insane because I heard myself saying things which sounded insane to me. And it's such a shame because there's a lot of really good and amazing beneficial things to these experiences, which are overshadowed by people's social fear of what could happen. I had a friend of mine.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine who told me, and I'd never forget this because it was just seemed so bizarre to me entirely. But he told me that he would never do psychedelic drugs because he had a friend who did them, and after he did them, he turned gay.
Oh,
That was his words, and he was scared of that, and therefore he would not have what could be a very transcendental experience, which is that
it,
stigma.
it's a
Well,
lack
about
of
what he,
understanding, right? It's ignorance, really. It is. It's really because maybe it did happen that way. Not that it turned gay. Maybe just something
yeah,
fell down for him, defenses, or he just was more comfortable acknowledging that.
mm,
It's just a lack of understanding and ignorance around the dimensionality of who we are, of our humanity, of our psychology. It's really just being taught that this equals this plus this, and we go with that. So, but a lot of people are there,
but
and
is there any
that's
branches of holotropic breathing or transcendental psychology which don't touch on the spiritual realm or spiritual dogma? Because I
yeah.
feel that is there any that you would like to share, or any that you would recommend? That's
Cognitive, any kind of talk therapy is not gonna touch upon it. Freudian
eh,
psychoanalysis is not gonna touch upon it. Jungian is gonna touch upon it a little more. Um, but yeah, like the more traditional ways of doing therapy are not touching upon spirituality. If spirituality is the part that's really turning people off, which is not what I experience in my, at least in where I live. But we don't really drive that in holotropic breathwork. We don't really drive the spiritual aspect. We talk about all kinds of experiences, um, but we bring a lot of psychology in because we want to explain to people. Would you just describe the whole feeling that I'm going crazy, I'm going mad? We want to explain to them. We want to give them enough information so they feel they have resources. And when that happens, they're not freaked out. Um,
Mm.
they can go back, oh, this can happen. They told me about this. This actually happens. And this is what happens when that happens, kind of like that.
Mm. 'Cause that
So
was
yeah. And I feel like everybody with any experience that is expanded state of consciousness, you are going to touch into the spiritual aspect because you just go there. And you can call it spiritual, you can call it wholeness, or that's something that is beyond your ego. Transpersonal, you can call it transpersonal. The transpersonal experience.
well, that's was my understanding as well, but it took me a while to figure it out for myself how, and like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, my way of doing so was to connect and see where they align more than anything else between spiritual sayings, scripture, and dogma,
Uh-huh.
and which often even strike a chord when you hear a quote or something which seems true to a lot of people on a deeper level. And then
Yeah.
also the scientific side of things, or the psychological or analytical side of things. Because I feel that often when people are thrust into these experiences, their brain understands it before their brain experiences it and understands it, or say brain, the body, their essence understands it before
Yeah.
their logical brain can catch up and piece things together.
Yeah.
And it's that which I feel is often the scary part, because as soon as you start to think of things in a religious way in the Western world, it's very instinctive for you to just go, heaven and hell is real, and now I am absolutely terrified that hell could be real and I could potentially be living in it, or whatever that your mind might take you down.
Yeah.
And that's where,
Yeah.
if
Mhm.
there was a way, especially in today's age with how popular breathwork and different routines and disciplines tend to be and are becoming
You-
prevalent, if there was a way that people could experience these modalities and disciplines, but without alluding to a anything that seems quite woo woo in that sense,
Right.
I feel
Yeah.
there would be a
Yeah.
lot more people who would
Mm.
undertake that, and I feel that the more people that undertake those experiences, the better
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
would
Well,
get along in a lot of times.
yeah. I don't feel like holotropic is very woo like that, in the sense that it was crafted by a psychiatrist, by a scientist, right? He was a scientist before he was anything. Stan Grof. I mean, he is. He's still alive. Um, so it brings a lot of the academia in it, and also a lot of structure. So we don't really talk about spirituality that much. When we do orientations to people, what we're teaching them, we're telling them is how the format's going to be, what our roles are as facilitators, their roles. And then we kind of talk about the experience that they can have. And we touch upon many of them, but we don't go fully deep into them because we also don't want to condition them. We want
Mm,
them to have the experience they're going to have without us putting too much content in them. And then that's
mm.
it. Then we explain the whole process. Um, we do body work, which is energy release work, and it's not massage. But we have different techniques of
How does
working
that work?
with the body. So, and this happens more in modules and where people are more experienced with holotropic. So let's just say this is something we explain to them. Let's just say that it's a holotropic is a 3-hour music set, 3-hour breathwork session, and then you go into art integration into a different room. So let's just say that you've been breathing for a while and you have this like pain because it's very somatic. With holotropic breathwork, you're gonna feel it in your body. So it's very embodied. Let's just say you have this pain on your shoulder and you've been breathing through it and it's just there, it's present. So you ask us to work with you. So we have different techniques for different parts of the body because different parts of the body carry different traumas. Obviously, the sexual organs are gonna have different charge on it. So we will go by your shoulder and well, ask you if it's okay for us to work with you. Maybe put our hand here, depending on where it's at. And then we'll coach you to breathe into it. That's the only time we'd actually interact with you. And we'll match your intensity. So we'll have you breathe into it and like kind of like with your force and go into the pain. And the more intense you are, the more we press until you say stop. And we go in that way until it kind of peaks and it releases. Now that can take many forms. It can be around the body, it can be in many aspects, many parts of the body, and it can turn into like a lot of work on the ground. So that's something else that happens. And there's no boo boo or anything. It's very primal. It's very much in your body. Yeah. So
So, so I was saying just a bit on that physical side of things because this is where, for me, that this is the biggest one of the biggest questions I have, which is what can be resolved psychologically and internally, and what has to be resolved through external medication and medicines, and say modern medicine. Because I do believe there's a lot to do with the mind, and majority to do with the mind, and we've pushed different things onto us at different times. And the fact that placebos that
yeah,
we know work as natural placebo drugs can fix real things that are wrong with the body or not
yeah.
functioning correctly with the body. It's how have you seen any experiences or any have you ever experienced anything where somebody has had a real have a physical pain or internal pain or illness, which has then started to heal itself after partaking in
I've s-
holotropic breathing?
I've seen it with plant medicine. I have not seen it with holotropic because what I feel that's happening usually around whatever thing they're doing in their body is releasing trauma that is stored in the tissue. So it's
Mm,
of course it's going to have a physical component that it is going to express physically at some point, but that is not the root cause. And of course, Western medicine has its ways. It's just that that it shouldn't have the place that it has, where it reigns and rules everything. We should mix it with other things. This is not the only thing. Of course, if I break a leg, I'm going to go to a hospital. I want to see a Western doctor. If I have something more chronic, I might see a Western doctor. I'm also going to see probably a Chinese medicine practitioner and other type of medicine out there. When it comes to the soul, which is linked to the psychology, I'm probably not going to go to a Western doctor. I've been there. It hasn't helped me. So different aspects are going to need different things. That's kind of my approach with it. I don't discount any of them. I just think it's important to find the place where they belong and where they have the most effect.
mm. So when you say trauma, just to clarify, do you mean sort of historical trauma and emotional trauma more than trauma like injuries physically?
Yes, of course,
Because
the physical injury can leave a trauma too. It can connect. Like this is a thing you cannot really separate too much because sometimes a physical injury can lead to emotional trauma. Let's just say through physical impairments or lack of mobility or things that you used to enjoy in your life that you cannot anymore. It's going to affect your emotions. It's going to affect your psychology. So, but let's just say that the origin of these traumas I'm talking about are psychological or yeah, in the biography, they're not necessarily physical in terms like the
so
person did not fall and broke something, and this is why. Yeah.
so what examples would you say um, can be most helped or most aided through holotropic specifically for people who aren't interested in or aren't ready or aren't interested or isn't their path to take plant medicine?
Emotional trauma, any kind of biographical trauma, things that happened to you that were not supposed to happen, and things that didn't happen that you needed to happen. These are like trauma by omission,
Like
meaning you
neglect.
didn't get the care you needed. Yeah, neglect, you didn't get things you didn't get that you were supposed to get.
Mm.
That's the biographical trauma. There can be transpersonal trauma sometimes, cultural trauma. We participate in cultural traumas. People that go through war together, they're gonna have a cultural social trauma that they're carrying. Generational trauma that we carry from generations. The children of slaves, the children of the people of the grandchildren from the Holocaust victims, they're gonna carry that trauma. It's still with them. So there's so many levels of them. And you can still see it in the societies. It's not so woo-woo. Like you can still see it in America, for instance. The African American population still carries that slavery trauma. It's very much there.
So
Um,
would the process change from how you were if someone was to come to you and say they had a particular type of trauma, would it change your approach from the start, or would it be a very similar approach
yeah,
where you get them straight into it?
No, not with a holotropic. But probably depends on what needs they have. We would have different conversations with them. But then we trust that the inner healing wisdom is gonna bring them the journey that they need. And we're there to support that.
Mm,
Let's just say that they tell us in advance that they have a trauma around anger, growing up in a very violent home, and them carrying a lot of anger and violence, and that this might happen, that there might be violence, and they need to express that. So we'll make sure that we have the appropriate tools, like enough pillows.
mm,
The only time we stop is if they're going to hurt themselves, somebody else, or the property. So we just make sure we facilitate, we create the right environment for that to happen in a safe place.
mm. And because I've heard that it takes different amounts of time for different people to get to that certain spot that helps them the most. Is it a case that sometimes it just doesn't happen? It never People
Yeah,
never
that happens every once in a while. Yeah. And I cannot say why.
not not sure why.
It's part of the mystery that why certain souls are there. But I feel like if you're seeking for a reason. I feel like those, they just never seek. You're not even gonna come. You're not interested.
So you say that again. So those who aren't seeking.
Yeah. I feel like the ones that are seeking, something is happening for them, is going to. Now the level at what that uh, the rate, the level of depth or resolution, evolution, that depends on each person, and there's no way to know. We don't know why.
Mm,
Yeah. Or what's the guiding. That's part of the inner intelligence. And the thing is that we don't question that because we're not God, or we're not like this supreme being that is supposed to know all those answers. Like, who am I to judge your journey? You're a sovereign soul in the
mm,
end. I only have limited knowledge. It's not like I know better and I know, you know what I mean? It becomes a little arrogant if I'm here on this side, just pretending that I know what's best for you, what you should do, what your journey should look like.
mm. 'Cause it's becoming more clear to me that a mix between some sort of form of mind expanding practice and Western medicine, obviously for different things, and exercise is important for different reasons in different ways. But it seems that some people don't often obviously need or feel the need for these things. And it's to me it becomes a question of how would you know whether or not that this is something that could benefit you?
That is something that I can't answer for people. You will know or you will not know. Sometimes it just comes with a curiosity. Sometimes people are just curious, and that's enough to get them. We all get there by different reasons. Desperation, it's the main reason why people get there. They're desperate. They've tried everything. They're sad. They're depressed. They've been on medication for a while. They're still depressed. That's usually the easiest. Those people are going to come. You're desperate. You've been suffering for a long time. You want it to end. You want something to change. And then the other ones are more comfortable. Sometimes it's curiosity, and sometimes it's nothing at all because that's just not where they're at.
Do you find a difference in how it affects those people who approach practice with different intentions? Is there any
Well, we go.
commonalities to how they experience the practice?
I feel like, yeah, I feel like the people that are desperate, that are really suffering, they're coming with a very clear intention. They're there to work, if you will. They're very invested.
It,
And the people that are more curious, it's like the lighter aspect. And sometimes they have a very robust experience, and it's amazing because sometimes that lightness, that curiosity, is perfect. It's exactly what we needed to.
so do you find that people who have particular perceived issues and are in different situations or similar situations have or see or engage with similar entities, deities, or likewise experiences? Is there almost like a common roadmap for certain archetypes, or is it almost seemingly random with who who and what what happens
And
with who?
I don't think it's random. Um,
Seemingly
in
random, I
that
mean, from the outside.
from the outside, it might be, but it makes sense to them and to their story and to their their lineage. Yeah, it
Mm,
might seem random to you and me, but like I said, we don't have access to the whole field of information at all times. So, mhm.
that was my sort of attempt to try and bring this modality into a scientific realm, being often within lots of psychotherapy and say CBT or
Mhm.
different things, speech therapy. There is a progression which can be monitored to adjust the level of attention or care or guidance that a person would receive for where they're at. And I would love to know whether or not, from your experience, obviously for years' experience and practice within holotropic breathing and different modalities, whether you can see sometimes a linear path to recovery
I,
through these modalities.
I can. And it's not linear, it's more like a spiral. It's more like a spiral upward. So, not a straight line. It's going to be like a cycle. Sometimes you visit the same things, but you're a bit higher up. Not in hierarchy, but in like your relationship to it, your experience to it, your orientation to it. So you revisit layers, but you go up. But it's not just like that. And yes, there definitely is. And I've seen it in me and I've seen it in people that engage with this periodically. Yeah, there's a trajectory. There are things that were issues that are not issues ever again. There are things that actually do get resolved for good and forever. There are things that used to be a problem that now you're like, ah, you know, that doesn't bother me like that anymore. Triggers are not there anymore. Memories that are not charged. That happens. Mhm. For
Mm.
sure.
So, as an experienced practitioner, are you able to see where someone will have a general idea of where someone might be along that spiral path?
If I've been working with them for like a long period of time, yes. Mhm. If it's the
Mm,
same person, I'm able to see it. They're able to see it too. They can report back
mm.
and just go,
It's in,
wow, that thing that used to really that big core trauma, it's not, it happened, but it doesn't grab me. Yeah.
it does seem, I mean, I'd say it does have, just saying it then, it's a term I haven't heard for a while, by the way. It's a Buddhist term, isn't it? The spiral path.
Mhm.
Yes, and I've said it then, and it just reminded me because I haven't heard of it in years. But hearing you talk about it, it does ring a bell with similar experiences that I've had. And I'd love to know if other people have as well, where it does seem like you do revisit similar stages at different times.
Mhm.
But even though they've seemed very similar, it feels like you are further along than you
Mhm.
were
Yep.
previously.
Yep. Yep.
Even
Exactly. Mhm.
like almost whether it might just be a comfort and an acknowledgement of where you are, as opposed to your leading to a definitive end.
Right. Yeah. And
Mm.
not everything can be resolved. And this is something that psychoanalysts actually talk about. And part of the analysis, and this is not this is actually very analytical, is getting to be comfortable with that.
Mm. So would you
Because
say
that's a
it's
very Western approach again. Let's just solve it. Let's just get to that. And sometimes
yeah.
there are things, and I'm gonna say that a lot of them do, and in my experience, I've moved through so much. And some things are like, wow, you're still there,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah, because that was again, that was akin to my journey at this stage. 'Cause I'm 26 at the moment, and it gets me excited for the years to come if I'm blessed to have met as many more as I'd like. That things seem to be ticking along well, and I feel that I know more than I knew previously. And if that's the case continuously, then it makes me just excited to see what I'll know in the future, which I don't know now. And that's where part of it seems like it's doing things like holotropic breathwork or meditation or different things that are more mind expanding experiences. Sometimes feel like like I'm doing it intentionally as a rush to get there, as a rush to get
Mm,
to that spot, which
mhm, mhm.
isn't.
You'll never get there.
Yeah.
You'll get to places and milestones, and they'll feel really good. but another one will show up and another one. So
Mm.
it's just the more you seek, the more that shows up. Yeah.
That's because that was my experience of more showing up. Then it's at times I found that I've just dropped completely the idea of progression and the idea of striving forward. And for a limited amount of time, that has been the most bliss that I've had
Yes.
was. But then over time, you then look around and realize, there's things that you haven't done which would have been beneficial to do. Kind of striking that balance between that flow state of non-wanting and
Yeah.
non-desire and things that are
Everything.
actually important on a societal level. Because there just seems to
Everything
be
is
a
a
lot of
balance.
contradictions. Seems to be a lot of contradictions for it. Would you say that people can just go too much into these practices?
Of course. I was just going to say balance is everything. Being grounded is good. We have and this is in Portuguese, but it's like the fine study is a big thing for us in our plant medicine, in our lineage. Everything is a fine study. The fine study means a fine study between firmness and softness, too much and too little. You're always fine polishing that. It's not here, it's always the middle path. So, and you're
So,
always in that dance.
so would you actively turn people away and advise them not to practice if they have seemingly too
Yes.
into it? You'd say.
Not like that, but there are contraindications for holotropic, for plant medicine, for a lot of different things that, and there are moments we will turn them off. If they're very ungrounded, if there is like mental illness diagnosis, not all of them, but psychosis, schizophrenia, for plant medicine as well. Yeah, there are moments we turn it away. And not that holotropic wouldn't be beneficial, just not the container that I can offer. Because that we need to do it with 24/7 supervision. Because guess what? This expanded state can amplify or have them go into an outbreak. And they're gonna need support. And I can't offer that. So it's not ethical for me to open that kind of worm and then, okay, you go home now.
Mm.
So that's about the times. Yeah, sometimes when they're ungrounded, just like my shaman friend told me back then, many years ago, you're not ready for this. You're too scattered. And I did listen. And instead of doing plant medicine, I went and studied shamanism and meditation with her for a while before I did it. So for sure, yes. Mhm.
Mm. Yeah, so I'm just also trying to figure out whether or not it's something I'd want to look into on more of a serious level or not. But I guess time will tell whether it comes my way or not.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah. Anyway, Barbara, thank you so much. I
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. You've helped with a lot of my questions out at the beginning. Is there anything you would like to say about your own practice and what you facilitate, and to everyone else who might be thinking about it at this time?
Oh, I think I'm good. I think we covered a lot of soil terrain. Mhm.
Amazing. Awesome. We'll leave it there then.